Hello everyone and welcome to the Game Engine programming series where we write a game engine from scratch. Before we start, I'd like to thank my dear viewers for subscribing to the channel and for liking and commenting on the videos. I very much appreciate you contributing to the growth of this channel. And a very special thank you to my patrons on Patreon. I'm really flattered that you find this project worth your support, which is greatly encouraging me to continue and improve my work. So thank you all and let's get coding. In the previous episode, we imported two functions from the Gamecode DLL that we can now use to get a list of available scripts and their creation functions. So today we are going to use those functions in the level editor and add and display script components to the game entities. Also, we are going to iron out a couple of kinks in the level editor that have got to do with building the game code and adding script components to the engine side. Before we write the code for the script component class, I would like to know what scripts are available for us to use for our game entities. So here in the project class, I'm going to just ask for all available script names. I'll make a property for that would contain that information for us. And we can fill this array of strings in whenever we load the Gamecode DLL. Next, I'm going to create a class for the script component, like we have for the transform component here. Because we are going to save this component, it's going to be decorated by data contract attribute. And this is for now a pretty simple component. It only contains a string, which is the name of the script. And of course, we want to save this name. So it's a data member. And then we also can implement the multi-selection variant of this, which is multi-select script. We do that for all the components. And here, like we did for the transform component, we have two methods that will propagate the changes from the multi-select component to the selected component and gather information from the selected components. And now that we have the multi-select script, I can implement the get multi-selection component for script component, which just creates a new instance of multi-select script. Let's see what we need to do in game entity to also support script components. Okay, first, of course, we need to add a known type for the serializer to know that a component can also be a script component. And also, since we are going to add new kinds of components to the game entities, we need a couple of methods to add components to a game entity and remove them from the game entities. Here in add component method, we check if the component is not null. Obviously, it shouldn't be. And then we check if the list of components already contains that type of component by comparing the types. And if a component of that type is not already in the list of components, then we can add it. But first, we remove this entire game entity from the engine by setting its active property to false, which will consequently remove the entity from the engine. So if it's false, then the entity ID is set to invalid and the entity is removed. And then we add the component and then add the game entity back to the engine. And if this test fails, so if this type of component is already in the list of components, then we just give a warning and return false. To remove a component from the list of components, we again check if it's not null or it's not a transform component, because transform components can't be removed. All game entities need to have a transform component. And then if this component is contained in the list of components, then we can remove it. But again, first we remove the entire game entity from the engine and then remove the component and then add it back to the engine. Next, we need a WPF control that we can use to display the script component. Here we have one for the transform component, and we need one more for the script component, and I'll call that script view. Again, this one is pretty simple. It just displays a text block with the name of the script. I'm going to remove world editor from the namespace, so we have only editors. And that's all we need to display a script component. And now I'm going to write code to actually add components to the game entity. Therefore, we are going to go to game entity view, where we display the list of the components and some information about the selected entities. Here we can add a new data template for the script component. And we already had made this toggle button to add a component, but it doesn't do anything yet. So today I'm going to write some functionality for this to actually add a new component here. First, I'm going to create a context menu that I can attach to this toggle button. And whenever I press this toggle button, that context menu will open, and then it will present us with a list of components that we can choose from. One of those components will be obviously the script component, and then we can also choose from the available script names. So here I'm creating this context menu, and it's open whenever the toggle button that's attached to it is checked. And when this toggle button is unchecked, it will close. And for the sake of example, I put a couple of items in this context menu, like geometry and physics. And the physics has a submenu with rigid body in it. And there is also a script component item. And the item source for that submenu is bound to the available script names. So this is just an array of strings. And then we can choose from those. For this menu item, I'm having a style here that will disable the item whenever the list of available scripts is empty. So we can't select anything from this submenu. And then for each of those available scripts, which will appear as an item in this submenu, I'm setting their style. And their header is just a binding, which will display the string in this array. And when we click one of those names, this method will run and add the script component to the game entity. Okay, so let's do a little bit of formatting here and then implement that method to add components to the game entity. Okay, let's now implement this function and this one. So this is basically to open the context menu whenever we click on this toggle button. First, I need to implement this function as well on add script component. I'm just leaving it empty for now, so we can test first. Let's actually also set a breakpoint to see if we get the names of the scripts that we have. So here in load game code, we can see what we get here. All right. Now you can see that we have one script called script1. And well, this list contains the name of that script. And here in add component, you can see that we have this menu now. And if I click on script, there is this item that I can choose from, script1. And if I click it, nothing happens because we still have to implement that method. But it works without any errors, so that's nice. Now let's add another script and see if that one is also added to the list of script names. Yeah, now we have two scripts, kusalagubakup and script1. Awesome. Now let's implement that add script method. Because we are going to eventually add different kinds of components to the game entity, I'm going to have just one method that we can use to add different kinds of components to the game entity, and then call that from each specific add component method. So in this case, we have add script component, and then I can do something like add component, and then give it parameters that can be used to create this particular type of component. So therefore, I'm going to create a component factory, and that's like a small class that we can use to get information about different kinds of components and also create different kinds of components. First here, I'll add an enumeration type that has every component so far in it. And if we have new components, I'll put that in there as well. So far, we have a transform component and the script component. And in this component factory, we just have a create function and some data that tells the create function how to create a component. So we can call this method to get a function that will tell us how to create this type of component. And here we just have an array of functions that will create a type of component if we call them. Because the elements in this array are in the same order as this component type enumeration, we can just index into this array and return the function for that component. And then here, where we create these components, we can just call a creation function. Here, this method is called whenever we click on one of those script names in the menu items. And then here we can just get what the name of that script is from the header of this menu item and then call add component to create a script component. Now I have to implement this add component method. Here I am having a list of game entities and their components so that I can use them for undo redo actions. Here, for each selected entity, I'm going to create a component that is of this type. So I'm using its creation function to create that kind of component. And then I'm going to try to add that component to each entity. And if that succeeded, so if that entity doesn't have that kind of component already, then I'll just remember what entity was changed. So this entity, for example, has a new component added, and then I'll add that component and that entity to the changed entities, so I can undo this action later if I press undo button or Control Z. So here, if there are any changed entities, that means that if there were any components added to any entities, then we are going to add undo redo actions to the undo redo manager. Here we have first the undo action, which just removes the component that we added to the changed entities. And the redo action adds it back to each entity. So that's pretty simple. And now we need to finish the addition of script components in the game entity that we do in Engine API. But that will have to wait until I see you next time. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you join me on Patreon, you'll get access to the code on GitHub, so you don't have to type everything over from the video. Plus, there are also other nice goodies and rewards exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Please use the link in the video description to check them out. I hope to see you next time. Until then, take care and happy game engineering!